Hey everyone, welcome to this week's video. I'm Shelly from the Vintage Hen and Chick, and in today's video I have 3 trash to treasure thrift flip projects for you. And I'm kind of feeling the fall vibes a little bit, and you'll see that in the color that I chose for 2 of the projects. And so we have a stool, a little cubby drawer, and a clipboard that I'm going to transform into a recipe holder. So let's get started. For my first project, I have this stool that I picked up at a garage sale. I believe I only paid $2 for it. And as soon as I saw it, I knew exactly what I wanted to do with it. I wanted to make this look super chippy and super old. I wanted to give it a really aged look. And so I'm going to start out by using the Sweet Pickins beeswax bar, and I'm going to rub it over the entire stool. And what this beeswax bar does is it creates a barrier between the stool and your paint. And it's also going to help the paint that you're putting on top of the beeswax chip and distress super easy, which is exactly what I wanted to achieve with this stool. So I'm going to apply the beeswax bar over the entire stool, and then we're going to start painting. I have the beeswax applied to the whole stool, and I'm going to be painting this with Sweet Pickins in the color Sweet Potato in the milk paint. I love this color, and to me it screams fall. And so I just mixed equal parts of my milk paint with equal parts of warm water. I mixed it up for about 2 minutes. You just want to make sure that you get everything nice and dissolved in that warm water. And then I always put mine aside for about 10 minutes to let it thicken up, because you want it about the consistency of a melted milkshake. And now I'm just going to apply 2 coats of my milk paint over the entire stool. I'm going to let it dry thoroughly in between each coat. And then once I have the 2 coats applied, then we'll come back and do the next step in this project. And you're going to see how that beeswax bar created a beautiful resistance with the milk paint, and how it created a beautiful chippy appearance. It's going to make distressing this stool so much easier. So my milk paint is now completely dry, and oh my gosh, look at that beautiful chipping. I didn't even use my blow dryer in between each coat. I just set it aside and let it air dry, and that beautiful chipping is exactly what that beeswax bar did for this project. And so now I'm just taking my 220 grit sanding sponge, and I'm gonna just sand off all of that chipping paint, making sure that I get all the loose flakes off the stool and all my paint is smooth. So I'm going to continue to sand until everything has flaked off and I have that beautiful, gorgeous, old, chippy look to the stool. My stool is ready to be sealed, and to add to my vision, of an old chippy stool. I'm gonna seal it with Sweet Pickins black wax. And this wax is so easy to use. All you have to do is apply it with either a brush or a paper towel or a dry cloth, and you simply just rub it on and then buff off the excess. So I'm going to continue to apply the wax over the entire stool. I'm already loving the look that it's giving me with that black wax against that sweet potato milk paint. It's making it look nice and old and nice and grungy, which is exactly what I wanted. So I'm going to continue to apply the wax, get this whole stool sealed up, and then this project will be done. All right, here it is. I love the color. I love the chippiness. I love everything about this little stool. Let me know in the comments what you think. I would love to hear your opinion. For my next project, I have this clipboard, and I have a whole bunch of these in my stash, and so I wanted to think of a way that I can repurpose the clipboard. And so I decided that I'm going to transform it into a recipe holder. And I had some sweet potato milk paint left over from my previous project with the stool, and so I thought we're going to use the rest of that up on this project. And so I'm just going to give the clipboard 2 even coats of my milk paint on the front and the back, and I'm going to let it dry completely in between each coat. Now, because this wood is kind of like an MDF type wood, it's really absorbing that milk paint in. So at this point, I didn't know if I was going to get any chipping or not, and it didn't really matter if it was chippy or if it was smooth. I just wasn't sure what kind of outcome I was going to have. So I'm just going to apply the 2 coats of the milk paint, let it dry completely, and then we'll come back and see what happened. So here's what the clipboard looks like after 2 coats of the Sweet Pickins milk paint, and we do have some crackling and a little bit of chipping, so we're just going to go with it. And I'm going to take my 220 grit sanding sponge and sand the entire clipboard just in case any of that paint is going to chip off, and also to make sure that my surface is really smooth because I'm going to be applying a transfer. So I'm just going to continue to sand the entire clipboard, smoothing everything out and distressing the edges a little bit and getting rid of any paint that's going to chip off. So as you can see, we did get a little bit of chipping of the paint and some crackling and crazing, and that's totally fine. It's just going to lend to the vintage feel of my recipe holder. And so I'm going to be adding a transfer, and I chose a transfer piece from the IOD Lover of Flowers transfer set, and I just cut it out, and I'm going to apply it towards the top of the clipboard because I'm going to be doing something else on the bottom. So I'm just going to lay my transfer down where I want it, and then I'm going to take my transfer tool, rub over the transfer, get it all nice and applied to the clipboard, and then I'm going to start on one side of the transfer and start peeling away that transfer vellum from the transfer. And as you can see, the transfer is adhering really beautifully to the milk paint. I never have any problems putting transfers on milk paint. Once I have that transfer applied, then I'm just going to take the transfer sheet and burnish over the transfer, make sure everything is nice and stuck to my clipboard, and then we'll move on to the next step. Okay, so now I'm going to add the word recipes to the bottom of my clipboard, and I'm going to be using the letters from the IOD typesetting stamp to do this. And so I've already peeled off the letters that I need to spell out the word recipes, and I'm going to lay it down on my clipboard where I want it to go, just to kind of figure out my spacing, make sure everything looks okay and fits in the area. And then once I have it laid out how I want it to look, then I'm going to use my thin mount to pick up those letters. And guys, here's a tip. These thin mounts work wonderful when you're using stamps because of the grid lines. And so I picked up my letters with the thin mount, and now I can just adjust the letters using the grids to make sure everything is even and lined up and that it stamps straight across my clipboard. And so I can use the grid lines on the thin mount to line up with the sides of my clipboard to make sure everything looks good. And so now I'm just applying some black ink to my letters, and then I'm going to line up those grid marks on my clipboard and then stamp down my recipes. And I like to use one hand to hold my stamp down and then the other hand to rub over the stamps to make sure I have a good impression. And as you can see, I'm missing one E in there, and that's because my IOD stamps only come with one E. So here I'm just going to clean off my letters, and I'm going to leave the E on my thin mount, and I'm going to re-ink it up. And then using those grid lines, I'm going to be able to easily stamp that E where it goes on my clipboard, and then everything's going to look even because I'm using the grid lines on the stamp. And then it helps tremendously to make sure everything looks great. Okay, my clipboard is ready to be sealed in. I did let the ink dry for a little bit before I sealed it so I don't smear anything. And I'm going to be using my Sweet Pickins satin top coat, and I'm just going to apply one even coat over the entire clipboard, the front, the back, and the sides. And then once I have that on there, I'm going to let it dry, and then this clipboard project is complete. Here is the recipe holder all complete. Let me know what you think. I could totally see this sitting on a kitchen countertop on one of those display easels, holding your favorite recipes or your grandma's favorite recipes. Let me know in the comments, is this something that you would display in your kitchen? My next project is this cute little cubby drawer that I picked up at a garage sale, and I really like the distressed look of it, but I'm not a fan of the color. And so I'm gonna recreate that look and make it look cuter. And I'm gonna start out by using my Sweet Pickins beeswax bar and just rubbing it over all the edges of the little drawer and on the knob. Those are the areas where I want it to distress easy after I paint it. So I'm just going to continue to rub the beeswax around all the edges and the top rim of the drawer, and then we'll start painting. So my beeswax is applied, and now I'm going to be painting this little cubby drawer with Dixie Belle's in the navy chalk paint, and I'm just going to give it 2 even coats, letting it dry completely in between each coat. You want to make sure when you put that paint on over the beeswax that you don't overwork it. That beeswax is going to create a resist for your paint, which is what you want. But when you're painting it, you just want to do even strokes over the entire thing so you don't work that beeswax too much. So like I said, I'm going to give 2 even coats to the entire little drawer. We're going to let it dry in between each coat and then come back and distress it. My paint is dry, and now it's time to distress this little drawer. And I'm just using a 220 grit sanding sponge, and I'm going to distress the entire drawer. Now typically chalk paint distresses quite easily, but I did apply that beeswax bar around the edges, and it's making it even easier to distress those areas. So here's a pro tip. If you're using a paint like the Dixie Belle Silk line that has a top coat built in it where it distresses a little bit harder, use your Sweet Pickins beeswax bars on your projects, and that's going to make distressing those projects where you use the silk paint way easier. So I'm going to continue to distress this little box, and then we'll move on to the next step. So now I'm going to apply a little piece of transfer to the front of this little drawer, and I chose a piece from the IOD seed catalog transfer set, and I really love this piece of strawberry transfers. I think that red contrasts beautifully with that navy blue, and I thought it would look really great on the front of this drawer. And so as you can see, I kind of cut out a notch where that handle of the drawer is going to be, and you can see that there's still blue space around there, but don't worry, we're going to take that piece that we cut out for the notch and we're just going to cut that up and fill in those spots, and you're not even going to notice a difference. And so I'm applying the transfer, rubbing over with my transfer tool, and then peeling back the transfer as it applies, and it applies beautifully to chalk paint. Once I get the transfer applied, I'm going to use my transfer sheet to rub over the strawberries to burnish those in. And now I'm just taking that little scrap piece of where I cut that notch out, and I'm kind of fitting in little chunks of that strawberry transfer here and there to fill up those spaces of blue that are showing. And once it's all done, you're not even going to notice that anything was cut out, and it's going to blend in beautifully. And that's one of the really nice things about IOD transfers is they layer nicely, and you can chunk them up and you can fill in spots and you're not even going to notice. So I'm going to continue to fill in those blue areas with little pieces of the strawberry, and then this part is done. So I wanted to distress my transfer a little bit because my drawer is kind of heavily distressed. And so I'm just taking my 220 grit sanding sponge here and distressing over the transfers just a little bit, just to dull them up a little bit, give them some distressed areas, and so everything kind of blends in and looks cohesive with the little drawer. So now it's time to seal everything in, the paint and the transfer, and I'm going to be using Sweet Pickins dark brown wax to seal this in. And here's a tip: if you ever want to richen up the look of a darker color like navy blue or red or black or something dark like that, use a dark brown wax. It really richens up and deepens that color. And so I'm just going to apply the wax over the entire drawer, and then I'm going to buff it back, and then this project is complete. Here is that completed little cubby drawer. I really like the way it turned out, and I hope you do too. Let me know in the comments what you think. Thank you so much for joining me today. All the products that I used in today's projects are available at thevintagehenandchick.com, and I'll leave all those links in the description box below. I'll be back next week with another fun video. Thanks again for watching, and have a wonderful day.